So far, all of the work that we have done in Python is using built-in data types and built-in functions, things that are so common that they are just available to you as soon as you start up the Python interpreter. But there is actually a lot more functionality built into Python and built on top of Python that we can unlock access to by bringing into the namespace, by importing it into our current session. So in this sections, we are going to talk about this idea of getting access to this additional functionality through modules. So here's one example of a module and how you gain access to it. Let's say that and this would be a terrible idea. Let's say that I am starting an online casino. So I'm going to have a poker table and I'm going to have a roulette wheel, and something I'm really going to need for this online poker site is a source of randomness. I'm going to need to be able to simulate in code shuffling cards or picking random the numbers, things like that. And there is a module built into Python that gives me access to various functions related to randomness. And the way that we gain access to this module is with a new keyword called import. So if I import and then the name of the module, which in this case is just random, this brings all of the random module functionality into my current session, so I can now access it. And the module is just Python code. So there is nothing magical about modules. They are just Python functions, pieces of Python code that live in a particular place on your files that Python knows to look for them. Okay, so I have imported random and now I can use various functions in the random module. So for example, let's say that I wanted to simulate a die roll. Like let's say that I wanted to simulate someone rolling a six-sided die. Do I get a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6? Well, there is a function in the random module that's all about this called randint. Generate a random integer. And here is what it looks like to invoke this function inside this module. We would say first the name of the module and then a dot. And the name, the function randint. And now, in this case, randint actually takes two arguments. It takes a lower bound on the number and the upper bound on the number that can be produced. So in this case, if we want to simulate a six-sided die roll, we would want our lower bound to be 1 and we want our upper bound to be 6. And this syntax, it looks kind of similar to something we have learned earlier. If you remember appending to items in the list, we had this idea of a dot function syntax. And so very similar here with modules as well. Okay, but so we are going to invoke the rand function module. Let's see what this does. Cool. And then we can use our up arrow through previous lines and of code. And I can just keep doing that over and over again to generate a bunch of random dice rolls. All right, so definitely crucial for our roulette wheel in my online casino. Another useful idea is to randomly pick an item from this list. So let's say people are using a card guessing game. We want to randomly select one card from the deck of cards. How do we do that? So there is another function inside the random module that's all about selecting items from the list. So let's get a list. Let's say cards equals Jack, Queen, King, Ace. So we have our list. We know it's a list because of the square bracket. So just doing a basic list assignment like before, and then there is this random dot choice function. And choice takes as an argument a list, and it will randomly select an item from this list. So let's see what we get. Modules are another really great place for documentation, for this idea that you don't have to keep this all in your head and look at the documentation whenever you need it. So for example, if I was wondering what else is possible with the random module, I might flip over to a web browser and type in Python random module, and let's see what the first hit is. And sure enough, the top link to the official documentation. There's a nice little preamble here explaining how the module works, and then a list of all of the things you could do. And if we scroll around a little bit, we'll see our random function doing exactly as we saw it did. We see our choice function, and then we see a bunch of other useful functions. We could shuffle a list. And so maybe if we could shuffling a deck of cards, this could be a really useful function in the random module for us to use. So a bunch of really useful stuff in this module. And there are tons of modules built into the standard Python library. So if you have installed Python, all you have to do is use the import statement. You have access to these modules. But in addition to the standard library, lots of people, and in fact you and I could, if we wanted to have written new functionality on top of Python. So for example, if you ever wanted to build a website in Python, you might install source code for the Django module, which gives you access to functionality for building websites in Python. Or if you wanted to do a data analysis and visualization, a really popular module for doing this is called matplotlib. And again, we would just install the source code into the particular place on our file system where Python knows to look for the code. And then you can use an import module to import matplotlib and use all this great stuff. And if you ever wanted to write your own Twitter kind of stuff, there is a Python code that wraps the Twitter APIs, sort of the functions that you can use to interact with the Twitter service in Python. So importing things is really important because it's a way that we gain access to broader functionality within the community.